An on again, off again relationship with the Clintons, who are kind of an interesting contradiction themselves politically in the way they relate to the Republican Party and to some of the Republican Party backers like Murdoch, for example. So Stone, on the one hand, spent a good part of his career trying to demonize Clinton. He also spent part of his career helping him. So Clinton, meanwhile, the supporters that Clinton had, both Clintons have, are very partisan Democratic, voters, and there's this contradiction in the political system. Republican constituency hates the Democrats. They have a horrible caricature of who they are as human beings, vice versa. So they hate each other. But Clinton actually has a very good relationship, for example, with the Bushes and with people like Stone. So, it seems an awful lot of the political controversy between Republican and Democratic candidates here is more circus, like professional wrestling or something, than anything. And I'm going to look at Stone's book in that context, really, that it's to promote himself and the Clintons in one way or another.
Does he work for himself or for the Republican Party?
Well, to not sound too much like a Marxist, they all work for the same class. There's a very small group of people with an awful lot of money that have an inordinate amount of influence over the political process. They all realize that if they're going to be allowed to play, that they can't, anger any of those people too much, and that they have to play the game. And so they all do very well, as a matter of fact.
What have you heard of this book?
Only, a little of what's been published. It's not, when I'm reading, when I see things like that, I'll go, oh, Stone's doing a book about the Clintons, and then I'll turn the page and see what's happening, in China with this factory, or in Russia, in Syria, or, things that are, I think, more important.
So, the facts, the news about this book we have already heard is just horrific things of private life of the family.
Yes.
And author says that, allegedly author said it's describing the horrific behavior of Hillary. She's a monster. She's beating Bill, the quote, furious scratching his face. How do you think, can we trust this author? I would ask you advice if we can trust everything he writes.
With looking at Stone within the current political context, he is probably being hired to, but certainly he is performing an act of political operation by publishing the book. The timing of it alone is very telling. I mean, this is the beginning in earnest of the presidential campaign. The first presidential debate, perhaps the same day the book comes out, within a day or two of that, for the Democratic Party. I think the Republicans are afraid that Hillary Clinton, if she makes it as the candidate of the Democratic Party, would be the strongest Democratic candidate. And so they want to either deny her the nomination if they can, or wound her as seriously as possible so that if she gets it, she's damaged goods by the time they get to the general campaign. I believe Stone's book is intended as one act towards that particular attempt to demonize her. Whether or not the horrible things about her are true or not, I wasn't there, it's difficult to say. I can say certainly that many of the things that Stone allegedly has said about, in this book, I haven't seen it either, but, what I've heard, are caricatures of, negative caricatures of women that generally feed into, like patriarchal imagery in the United States. She's not feminine, she's angry, she's violent, she's, all the things that women who do man things have been alleged to be like in this culture for the last 150 years. I mean, these are characteristics that they put on abolitionists in the 19th century, women, on suffragettes when women were looking for the vote, that they wanted to be men, that they were violent types, that they were maladjusted, that, et cetera, that they were angry. So, some of that is just playing stereotypes that play to the Republican base and that play to the American culture even below the surface. But, that's not to say that she's not a terrible person. I look at this Benghazi scenario, for example, where the Republicans have been apoplectic, trying to pin the death of the American ambassador and a few others on negligence of the State Department, and particularly on Hillary Clinton, to show that she's not worthy of being president, and etc. Hillary Clinton has blood on her hands in Libya, but it's not Benghazi, it's the entire country. She was one of the people that advocated the policy that drove 2 million people out of that country and leveled it, and killed tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, and set in motion this roving band of maniacs now that are destroying Syria and roaming the entire neighborhood there, Mali and a number of other countries in Africa and in the Middle East. So, it may be that Hillary Clinton scratches her husband's eyes out when they're at home or not. Even if it's not, it doesn't mean that she's, a good person. It's all gossipy stuff, and it doesn't really go to the heart of what people should be looking at when they're looking at a presidential candidate, and that is their character in terms of what they've actually done in their public life and the policies that they represent and that they plan to implement.
We know Hillary Clinton as a power woman who root him or maybe abuse him.
He's over 6 foot tall, and he grew up in the backwoods of Arkansas. Maybe he has some physical disability because he has cardiac problems and such now at this age, but she's the same age more or less that he is. And the idea of her physically abusing him, I think, is political theater. First, I doubt it, but who knows? And secondly, while we're looking at the current international situation, the economic situation inside the United States, is this what we should be talking about in determining who the next president of the United States should be? Or should we be talking about what is their policy towards expanding NATO to Russia's borders, to perhaps starting a world war in order to protect ISIS in Syria, to trying to overthrow governments all over Latin America, Africa, wherever? To me, it seems that those are much more important issues, and looking at how Hillary Clinton, and her husband for that matter, relate to that kind of behavior and have related to that kind of behavior since 1992 when Bill was elected, I think that's much more germane, and that's kind of what I've been focusing on. On that score, by the way, I think there's no chance in hell that she should be elected president.
Also, as well, remarks that Hillary was a drug-addicted person. Was she?
I have no idea.
No idea.
I don't know.
No rumors, no...
Well, there's rumors all the time. There's rumors that she has 6 months to live. There's rumors that Bill, another one of these, supermarket newspapers says, Bill Clinton says there's no way Hillary could beat Trump. And, that they're fighting over that. That, these things are what substitutes for discussion of public policy in the United States. This country's political culture is, if you were looking at it, in an academic measurement, it's like kindergarten, first grade, with the rest of the world somewhere between secondary school and postgraduate. The political culture here is primitive, to say the least, and so those are the kinds of things that people preoccupy themselves with, not just idly talking and chatting in the living room or whatever, but that's what they do on CNN, Fox, MSNBC, the news media. They don't do it supplementing a discussion of public policy. They do it substituting for a discussion of public policy.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. There are going to be any number of books, movies, reports of one kind or another that are like this, salacious, personal rather than having to do with public policy, having to do with operating in office, because again, that's the level of political discourse in the United States. In my mind, it would be much more damaging for people to read some of the WikiLeaks materials that concern Hillary Clinton, for example, as Secretary of State, and even some materials, like some of the things that have been released through FOIL and other ways of obtaining documents through official channels of Bill Clinton's presidency. You have the spectacle of people from the Black Lives Matter movement going to see Hillary Clinton to talk about mass incarceration. Bill Clinton, her husband, was the one that signed into law 3 strikes you're out, changed the sentencing structure in the federal system that was modeled in the other 50 states that had sentencing disparities where the kind of cocaine that was sold in the black community carried a penalty 10 times higher than the kind of cocaine that was sold in the rich white communities. And so when you're looking at the things that Black Lives Matter movement, for example, are complaining about, one of the worst offenders that created this condition that they're complaining of was Bill Clinton. This is not a matter of discussion whatsoever in this very important public policy issue that is getting some media play. So, you know, the presidential campaign for 2016, if this book by Stone is a kickoff for it, I'm going to start looking around on a map of the globe for a place to live next year because it's looking pretty scary.
So is every candidate is under attack, or just Hillary, or maybe Trump? Or
all of them. You know, politics in the United States is a full contact sport. It's like football, hockey, maybe more like hockey. It's all form and no substance, but the form is bloody. The people that are playing behind the scenes have very powerful interests that they're trying to protect or advance, very important interests. And the people who are doing the retail political staging, you know, the part that we see, the things that are actually happening behind the scene are not a part of that discussion, a part of that discourse whatsoever. So all they have to do, really, to discuss is each other. And, you know, for politicians, in the United States at least, the one time that you can rely on them to be telling the truth is if they're calling another politician a crook, because they're almost always right when they say that. But I don't think that you're going to see anything but attacks by one candidate upon another. That's within each party and across parties up until the primaries are over. And then when the candidates are selected, the Democrats will all stand behind their candidate and the Republicans all behind theirs, and those candidates will attack each other. I mean, I've heard so many things over the years about her. Yeah, but I have no idea if any of them are true. Again, they're not anything that actually deals with her actual record. We've had, you know, in my opinion, devastating a country, killing tens of thousands of people and, you know, driving 2 million, you know, like a quarter of the population into exile, and then starting wars in 4 or 5 adjoining countries as a consequence, and then saying, we came, they saw, he died, as sort of an encapsulation of that. To me, that's one of the most horrible things that, you know, one of the most horrible acts that's been committed by a public figure in the post-war period, since World War II. And yet that is not a topic of discussion. The topic of discussion is whether or not she smacks Bill around. And that's an interesting thing because, in a way, people fantasizing about that get to vicariously smack Bill around themselves through her. And there are millions of people in this country on both sides of the aisle who would actually like to do that, I think. You know, American culture comes from a very similar place, Slavic culture. You know, it's a blend of European cultures as the dominant culture, at least up until the very recent period. Italian, for example. All European cultures are patriarchal, essentially. Or any that were Christianized are patriarchal. God is the father, he's not the mother. You have Mary, you have Jesus, and everybody relates to the power of the universe in that way. And so the reason that this imagery of Hillary Clinton is presented to the public in this way is it's within that context. It's aberrant. It's something that runs against the grain of people's, you know, what they think are their instincts, but what they've been acculturated to. A woman does not brutalize her husband. That's not womanly. That's aberrant. And so by accusing Hillary Clinton of doing it, not in fact it isn't. In fact, I know, and Russians, you know, people from Africa, Asia, wherever, you have a man and a woman in a room, and the man does the wrong thing. If the man does precisely the wrong thing, the woman is going to punch him in the face. That's that, whether they're Russian or not, or American. So whether those things actually happen behind the walls at the Clintons' house, it's not something that I've stayed up nights wondering about. But the reason that it's part of the political discourse is that it's a way of making her look unnatural, and by extension, and this is the relevant part, I think, that's important politically, even though I hate to see her as a standard bearer of women's liberation, in the eyes of political culture here, she is by default. It's also a way of demonizing the aspiration of women for equality, for full equality in the political sphere here. Because when you have the representative of that aspiration, which she is, regardless of what else she is, looking aberrant, then it makes the entire impulse for equality among women appear aberrant. And that's the kind of thing that is in sync with other cultural ideas that are represented best by the Republican Party, where women shouldn't have abortions, women, even birth control, even having sex outside of marriage. These things are looked at in like almost a medieval way among millions of people in the United States, and those people constituting an important political constituency here, a determinative one in some ways. So yeah, whether or not she actually does that, this is brought into the political discourse with a very specific purpose. There's the general, or the more specific purpose of, let's just damage Hillary Clinton, and the polls tell us that if we say this, that will damage her. So they say it. But there are also people who are pushing those same buttons, whether it's aberrant behavior to aspire to equality, a woman president or whatever, that's aberrant, or if it's aberrant behavior to advocate for abortion rights, or to advocate for birth control, et cetera, et cetera. There's a very sort of cohesive political constituency and political class that represent that entire tendency in the body politic here.
Did Bill do some wrong things to be beaten by his wife or not?
I have no idea.
No idea.
I don't know. I mean, if you're talking about Monica Lewinsky,
previous girls as well.
Yeah. I mean, look, politicians are, the ones that go to Washington, first of all, spend a lot of time on the road. So they're away from their families. I don't know, musicians, people that go on a lecture circuit, book tours, authors, whatever. People who spend a lot of time on the road, they have extramarital affairs more often than people that go to work and come home every night, just because of opportunity and depending on how strongly their urges are manifest out of necessity. But so, Bill Clinton certainly isn't the only person in Washington, D.C. to have had an affair. It was very public, and that was done with a clear purpose of damaging him politically. There was an entire cultural event around that, where you had the spectacle of her standing behind him, and at the same time, rather than that being credited as it would be in the culture otherwise, the very people that are criticizing him would say, a woman should stand behind her man, or whatever. Well, instead, this was an example of her, base ambition being manifested. I can't let him get tagged because I want to be president next, and I want to stay with him so that we can be a political couple, et cetera, et cetera. It was all ambition and had nothing to do with these cultural values. Now, in reality, I have no idea what happened, and I could care less. Whether Bill sleeps with Hillary, whether, Chelsea is their child, or, dropped from a pair of wolves or whatever, I don't care. What I care about the people that are involved in public life, is what are they going to do with the power that is being entrusted to them, or in any event that they're going to have some control over, and what is that going to mean for the 300 million people here and the 6.5 billion people around the world, and whether Bill sleeps with Hillary or not, if she scratches him or not, I don't think that bears on it very much. Yeah, it's an interesting contradiction too, because probably, I don't know this for a fact, but from what I know of Russia and from what I know of the United States, probably people are divorced at a higher rate here than almost anywhere in the world, at least in the so-called first world. People here, I think the marriage success rate here now is around 35% or something. So on the one hand, the voters get divorced, as a matter of course almost. And yet, the politicians, whether or not they get divorced, this is a big topic of discussion. But see, the problem is that the agenda for the discussion is not set by the people that, here. It's set by the media. And the media here only talks to a very narrow band. They will only talk about people getting divorced or scratching their eyes out or whatever, as opposed to talking about public policy. As a matter of fact, they will talk about almost anything else except public policy. And that's in the course of an entire presidential election, which runs now 2 years, 3 years.